What quiet people are really thinking, you'll be shocked. That person sitting quietly in the corner of the meeting isn't bored. They're not shy. They're analyzing every single one of you. And they've already figured out who's lying. You know those people who barely speak, but somehow always know everything? The ones who stay silent while everyone else is talking, then drop one comment that completely changes the conversation. Yeah, those people aren't empty-headed. Their brain is running at full capacity. They're just not broadcasting it. And today we're getting inside their heads, because what quiet people are actually thinking will surprise you. Spoiler. It's not "I wish I could talk." It's more like "I wish you all would stop talking so I can think." Here's the thing about quiet people that most extroverts don't get. Silence isn't the absence of thought, it's the presence of processing. While you're talking through your ideas out loud, they're working through 17 different angles in their head. They're not slow, they're thorough. Think about the quietest person you know. When they do speak, what happens? Everyone stops and listens, right? That's not a coincidence. It's because their words carry weight. They've been listening, observing, calculating, and when they finally open their mouth, it's usually worth hearing. Psychology calls this internal processing versus external processing. Most people think out loud, they talk to figure out what they think, but quiet people think to figure out what to say. Completely different operating systems. But here's what's really wild about quiet people's minds. They're constantly running this background analysis of everyone around them. They notice who interrupts who agrees too quickly, who's lying, who's trying too hard to impress. They're like social scientists conducting field research, except the field is your dinner party. You think they're not paying attention, they remember everything. That thing you said 3 months ago that you forgot 5 minutes after saying it, they remember. They've filed it away with all the other data points they've collected about you. They're building psychological profiles without even realizing it. And here's something fascinating. Quiet people often see patterns that talkers miss because they're not busy formulating their next comment. They can see the bigger picture. They notice when someone's behavior changes, when the group dynamic shifts, when something feels off. They're the human equivalent of a security camera. But let's be honest about what's really happening in their heads during conversations. They're not thinking, "I wish I could contribute." They're thinking, "Should I tell them they're wrong or let them figure it out themselves?" They're mentally editing everyone else's statements for accuracy, logic, and relevance. It's exhausting. Here's what people don't understand about quiet people. They have opinions about everything. Strong opinions. They just don't feel the need to share them unless asked. And sometimes not even then, because they've learned that most people don't actually want different perspectives. They want agreement. There's this psychological concept called stimulation threshold, and quiet people have a different one than talkers. Too much noise, too many voices, too much chaos, and their brain starts shutting down. They're not antisocial, they're protecting their processing power, like a computer that slows down when too many programs are running. And here's something that will blow your mind. Quiet people often have incredibly rich inner lives. While you're scrolling social media, they're having entire conversations with themselves. They're working through problems, creating stories, solving puzzles. Their internal world is so interesting that external conversation often feels shallow. But there's a darker side to all this observation. Quiet people see everything, including things they wish they didn't. They notice when people are fake, when relationships are failing, when someone's smile doesn't reach their eyes. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss, and they don't get to have that luxury. Think about the quiet person in your office. They know who's actually working and who's just looking busy. They know who's taking credit for other people's ideas. They know which meetings are pointless and which decisions are being made in private before the official discussion. They see the real dynamics behind the official story. There's this thing called social fatigue that hits quiet people harder than others. After a day of listening to people, observing dynamics, and holding back their thoughts, they're mentally exhausted. Not because they're weak, but because they've been working overtime processing information that most people just let wash over them. But here's something beautiful about quiet people. When they choose to let you into their inner world, it's special. They don't share their thoughts with everyone. So when they share them with you, it means something. Their friendship isn't loud, but it's deep. Their loyalty isn't announced, but it's unwavering. Psychology shows that quiet people often prefer quality over quantity. In relationships, they'd rather have 3 friends who really know them than 30 acquaintances who think they're mysterious. They're not trying to be mysterious, by the way. They're just selective about who gets access to their thoughts. And here's what's really happening. When quiet people seem shy, they're not afraid of social interaction. They're evaluating whether it's worth their energy. They're asking themselves, will this conversation teach me something? Will it help someone? Will it move something forward? If the answer is no, they'll save their words for something that matters. There's also this misconception that quiet people are followers. Wrong. They're often the most independent thinkers in the room. They're not influenced by groupthink because they're not part of the group conversation. They're forming their own opinions based on their own observations. They're immune to peer pressure because they're not really peers with anyone. But here's something sad about quiet people. They often feel misunderstood, but they don't know how to explain themselves without sounding arrogant. How do you say I was analyzing your personality without sounding creepy? How do you say I have thoughts about this, but I don't think you want to hear them without sounding condescending? Here's what quiet people wish you knew. When they're silent, they're not judging you negatively. They're trying to understand you. When they ask questions, they're not being nosy. They're genuinely interested. When they finally share an opinion, they've thought about it from every angle. They're not being difficult. They're being careful. And there's this weird thing where quiet people often become the unofficial therapists in their friend groups. People tell them things they wouldn't tell anyone else because quiet people feel safe. They don't interrupt, they don't judge, and they definitely don't gossip. They're like human confession booths. But here's the paradox of quiet people. The less they say, the more people project onto them. Everyone thinks they know what the quiet person is thinking, but they're usually wrong. The quiet person becomes this blank screen where everyone projects their own insecurities and assumptions. Psychology calls this the spotlight effect. We think people are paying more attention to us than they actually are. But with quiet people, it's the opposite. We think they're paying less attention than they actually are. They see everything. They just don't comment on it. So what are quiet people actually thinking during your long story about your weekend? They're thinking about the part you left out, the detail that doesn't quite fit, the emotion behind your words that doesn't match what you're saying. They're not bored. They're reading between the lines. And here's something that might surprise you. Quiet people often have the best sense of humor. Not the loud, attention-grabbing kind, but the subtle, intelligent kind. They notice irony, they catch contradictions. They see the humor in situations that others take too seriously. They just express it differently. The truth is, quiet people aren't mysterious. They're just operating on a different frequency. They're not trying to be difficult or standoffish. They're just being themselves in a world that mistakes volume for substance, talking for thinking, and extroversion for intelligence. So the next time you're with a quiet person, remember this: their silence isn't empty, it's full. Full of observations, thoughts, insights, and understanding. They're not waiting for permission to speak. They're choosing when their words will have the most impact. And honestly, sometimes the smartest thing in the room is the person who's not saying anything at all. Are you a quiet person, or do you know one? What do you think is really going on in their head? Let me know, because I have a feeling the quiet ones have some thoughts about this. To get more psychology content like this in your feed, please subscribe, hit the like button, and share your experiences with us. You'll be supporting our efforts too. Thanks for watching.